Hi, my name is Patrick Walker, and I'm with the market research company EEDAR. So EEDAR collects a lot of video game data to help clients make better business decisions. This is a really fun and exciting time for us in VR because we finally have VR data. It was very hard when there wasn't consumer systems on the market to ask people what they thought about VR. We've tried VR and we know that you don't really understand it until you've tried it. And now we have about 6 months of great data, not only sales, but also just consumer engagement, consumer attitudes towards the platform. And that's what I'm going to be showing today. That's also why the focus of my talk is going to be on VR rather than AR. AR is very exciting. I think a lot of people, including Tim Cook, think that AR is eventually going to be bigger than VR. But right now, we have more data on VR. And that both makes for a more interesting presentation and makes it a little bit easier to figure out where VR is going. I'm going to be showing several data sets today. Data from our Steam Pulse data set, which shows Steam ownership, Steam engagement, which is really great for understanding the Vive. And then also data from our consumer tracker and several consumer surveys. And then also, with AR, I want to point out, I don't really consider Pokemon Go AR. We do have data on AR, and it mostly tells me that people turn off the AR functionality so that they can save their battery. So this is VR focused mostly. You may have noticed VR is pretty big right now. It's pretty hot. This is a picture of the moment that I realized, okay, I'm going to be speaking about VR from now on. This was GDC 2016, and I was giving a presentation just on the overall market. Walked into this hallway of people doing VR presentations and was like, I am talking about the wrong thing right now. So why are people so excited about VR? Well, one reason is the amount of investment dollars that are flooding in. Right? So year over year, we're seeing significant growth in investment on VR. This chart doesn't even include Magic Leap. And Magic Leap has over $1 billion of funding on its own, right? So we've hit over $1 billion in 2016 of investment into VR AR. Now, there is also the fact that 2016 became when VR hype had to become VR reality. And my favorite anecdote to explain this shift in thinking, or to think about this shift in thinking, is the quotes from Facebook, right? So in the tail end of 2014, Zuckerberg was talking about the Rift and their $2 billion investment. And he said, oh, well, for that to be a successful platform or a platform that matters, we're going to have to move 50 to 100 million units, right? Probably thinking about something like the PS4 install base or Xbox One install base. And then this year, the CEO is saying, well, if we can move 1 million units life to date, then we'll be satisfied. That'll be great. That'll be fantastic. A little bit of a coming down to earth in terms of the expectations for the platform, right? So where are we now? What's the VR roadmap? So this is the VR roadmap in November 2016. What we're seeing is really, there's two types of platforms being released, right? There's the accessible platforms, the mobile platforms, able to move more units, and then there's the more immersive platforms, right? On the more immersive side, we've got the Oculus and Vive. Accessible side, we've got Cardboard, Gear VR. And now we've got the PlayStation VR coming in, and that's pretty exciting because the install base of the PlayStation 4 47 million units end of year, means we first have the first platform that really has the potential to hit a little bit of that sweet spot, right? Where it's both accessible, a lot of people in the ecosystem, but also offering that deep immersion. Also have some exciting platforms on the horizon, right? We've got the Daydream coming out, which will have a hand controller, and Google really investing into the ecosystem. And then Microsoft has recently announced that they're going to try to make some third-party, lower-end $200 systems over the next couple years. So what does this look like? Well, in terms of headset price, you can see that relationship, or as they're more immersive, it increases. Oculus is now $800 instead of $600, but it started out at $600. And then when we look at our install base, right? So what's the worldwide install base estimated by the end of the year? There's this inverse relationship, as you might expect. For an $800 system, you're not going to have 50 to 100 million units. You're probably going to have closer to a couple 100,000, which is where we're at now. You do see that in the middle, the nice position that the PSVR is in, where they have both a pretty high price point, but also the opportunity to move 1 million or 2 units, which is really where, when we look at the overall revenue number, $1.5 billion this year, a lot of that is being generated by the PSVR, right? Because it's the first platform really has that sweet spot met. And it makes sense. These are expensive systems. And when we look at people and we ask them, what's the amount that you're willing to spend on a VR headset? It's pretty low percentage when you get to the $700, $800 price point where the Vive and the Oculus exist. PSVR is a little bit better. I put it at $450, because it's somewhere between $400 and $500 depending on whether you have the camera and hand controls. And then when the full market starts to be interested or say that they would be willing to buy that headset, you're at a lower price point around where the Daydream and the Gear VR are. It's just at that point, we start to lose some of the aversion, and it's a less high quality VR experience. We also have an install-based situation where there's only 5 million GPUs that can really even handle the high-end PC headsets. Right? So even if you attach 10%, you're still in that 250 to 500,000 unit range, which is where we're going to be at around the end of the year. 45 million PS4s is a much better install base to hit. All right. So who are these early VR adopters? What do they look like? Well, for one thing, they spend a lot of money, right? This is their spend on non-VR gaming, right? We see that for a PC VR owner, it's significantly higher than just a PC console gamer and higher than someone who is interested in purchasing a VR headset but has not purchased one yet. Interestingly, they don't necessarily play more than those who are interested. Right? The people who play the most are the ones who can't afford a PC VR headset yet, but they're excited about it and they're interested in purchasing. That also is a much larger group, something like 10x, 15x the size. So there is a lot of excitement about VR. It's just that the price points make it a little bit difficult at this point. They're also consumers with money. Right? So we say, make about $70,000 a year. Most have gone to college. 72% male, which is higher than the typical 60-40 split we see for console gaming. As a general rule of thumb, mobile is close to 50-50 male-female split. Console is usually 60-40. This is about 70-30. It's a very core gaming group in 20s. And they're spending a lot on VR right now, which is cool. It's about, of that 1.5 billion, about 250 million is likely to be software, right? For the number of people that are in the ecosystem, that's actually pretty good because people are spending a lot of money. They're also so far satisfied with the systems. When we ask, are you satisfied with the virtual reality headset that you purchased? Over 75% on both platforms say that they are. So have critics. Critics have been pretty high on these systems. Right? When we look across 5 to 6, 7 top tech sites and look at their reviews on the platforms, on the VR headsets, we see an average review score for the most part above 80, right? Which is kind of that standard for a good game, which a lot of even like compensation plans are tied to in development studios. And each headset has had pretty much its USP or the thing that was called out about it the most. Right. So for the Rift, the headset quality, the quality of the games, the length of games, the depth of the games was called out. Vive had the plus of coming to the market with hand controls and the full room immersion, which got called out in reviews a lot. Oculus has now caught up with that and now has touch controls. And then for PSVR, it was all about the price point, right? This is a good enough experience. This is a great VR experience, and you don't have to pay as much for it. And there's a lot of VR content that's already out there, despite maybe that there's not a huge install base yet for these systems. So this is the Oculus Rift game releases by release date and price point. You can see the launch there with software released at each $10 increment. If you've released a software for one of these systems, you're a dot on this chart. There is the recent PSVR release. Same strategy where at different $10 price points, we have content released. Now the openness of the Vive and the Valve platform has meant that there's a lot of content on that platform, right? Generally at a lower price point, but it's already a fairly saturated ecosystem only 6 months in, which does mean that in order to stand out, you really need to develop high quality content. These launches, when you look at them compared to traditional platform launches, have actually had a lot more content than both the 8th gen consoles, but also than I think what was previously the last really big accessory, the Move and the Kinect. So these have had way more software released across the Oculus, PSVR, and Vive. Now, when we look at must-have, the game that critics agree upon, saying that everyone needs to have, that hasn't really happened yet, right? If we say, all right, the must-have game on console has an average review score over 85. The only one we've seen is one PSVR title that's come out that did that. So on these PCVR systems, with the install base of a couple 100,000 units, there is a path to success of making a little bit over $1 million, right? That was somewhere like raw data, where we're moving 30,000 units, $40 a piece, making $1.5 million, right? I'd say that with the PSVR, where the install base would be higher up, could make $3 to $7 million. But the price points that have made this happen are around $40 and then around $20. So the titles that are doing lower price points at $5, $10 are having trouble making as much money. If you think about it, when there's only 100,000 users out there, 200,000 users out there, it really is difficult to move software based on price rather than quality, right? At this point, the way to move software is really to keep the quality high, get a high user score, and keep your price point up around $20 to $40. Also, I'll point out that this is average price, right? So this is based on the average of daily Steam pricing. So we're not seeing a whole lot of summer Steam style, just drastic price cutting, down to $5, $10 to move units. The software that is developing and making more money is keeping the price point high over time. Those are some of the top titles there. I'll show them on the next slide. That has more call outs if you want to take a picture of that one. So one thing that does really matter, and I think it's interesting because I hate to piggyback on bashing professional critics when Bethesda is doing a lot of that lately with not giving them early copies. User score really matters. So when you look at the correlation between Steam user score and revenue on the HTC Vive, there's a really strong correlation. I should point out that this is max revenue. So this is taking the number of owners, which we have really good data on, and Steam average pricing and multiplying them times each other. Because of things like giveaways and discounts and returns, that's typically about 15 to 20% higher. But it's a good number for just looking at these overall correlations. Here's some of the titles that have done the best, your top 15 performers on Steam VR. So Virtual Desktop, Hover Junners, Call of Starseed, Adrift, Raw Data, what do we got there? Audio Shield, Space Pirate Trainer, Vanishing Realms, Final Approach. A lot of these titles are also the ones that have been getting awards. And what we see in these titles is a lot of immersion, right? Deep immersion. In general, the titles that are getting the awards, that are moving the needle, that people are talking about, are more about the immersion and making someone feel like they're being transported than they are about traditional game quality. Things like content length, progression systems, what we traditionally see moving user scores and review scores. When we ask people, why do you purchase VR content, these user scores really seem to matter, right? It's the top endorsed reason that people say that they purchase these games. Interestingly, price is lower down the list. And I'll tell you what, we ask this question across a lot of different platforms. This is the only platform that price is lower down the list, right? If we ask this on mobile, price is not only at the top of the list, it's almost a quarter in percentage past the next one down, which is genre. right? So when we ask this about mobile, it's, oh, price and genre. Is it a game that I know the content type, and what's the price? And then it goes to word of mouth. So here on VR, word of mouth isn't as much because most people don't own these systems yet. Professional reviews are not up there. People are going to user reviews, and they're looking in these communities to see what people are saying about the game. Now, one thing that doesn't seem to matter to drive user score, which I think is important when you're thinking about developing this type of content, is the relationship between user score and playtime. Right? So we don't see that there's a strong correlation between what your user score is and the total time that people are putting into this content, right? The average number of minutes. The outlier here, which I think is very interesting, is virtual desktop, right? Because that is a type of experience on VR that works well for putting in a lot of hours. We have the best data for Steam VR. I do know anecdotally that if this was showing Gear VR and showing mobile apps, it's Netflix, right? That's popping out and showing a ton of average time played, right? It's in the functional use for VR. But what is heavily correlated is retention, how often you're coming back to an app, right? So this is that same graph showing the max revenue or showing the user score versus how often people have come back, what percentage have come back in the past 2 weeks. A lot of VR is about sharing it. A lot of the VR, I mean, we all remember the first time we took VR and got into it. We all also know that it's very rare to put somebody in it for the first time and their jaw not to drop, right? One of the most fun things about VR and what drives a lot of the system purchase is showing it off to other people and getting that magical aha moment. And these experiences that are getting the highest user score, people do feel a need to show them off every couple of weeks or several times a day. This retention metric is actually comparable to AAA at this point. So this is showing 5 games or 6 games. They are games that came out in April of May of 2016 around the launch of the Oculus and the Vive. These titles, a couple big AAAs, and then popular games on Steam VR. Several of these titles are bundled in, so they're the most owned games on the platform. I think The Lab, which is Valve's demo, by far the most owned HTC Vive game on the market. So we see that really the only VR experience that even comes close in terms of total playtime to the AAA titles is a functional application, right, is virtual desktop. But when we look and we say, all right, what about retention? It's actually very consistent, right? All these VR titles have been returned to in the past 2 weeks about as often as these big AAA titles, right? So people are feeling a need to come back and check out this content. When we look at this overall usage patterns, I think we can start to see what are the experiences that are going to be driving the growth on the platform, right? These are some stock images that I pulled from a great article on the LA Times. There we go, sweet. Yeah, so basically it was a pretty funny article that had some great stock images. If you're looking for stock images that are ridiculous, that's a great link to find them. But basically that there are 2 ways that VR content is being used. One is the functional, accessible way. This is to connect with people, things like virtual desktop, Netflix, AltSpace is a really great social application. And then there's things that completely transport and immerse people. So we're talking about The Lab, which is a set of immersive experiences. Raw Data, which as a game is only 4 levels. The progression systems aren't even that deep, but it does a really great job of making you feel like you're there. And because of that, it's able to get a really high user score and move a lot of units at $40 price point. And then Tilt Brush, right? Just a wonderfully immersive experience of painting in virtual reality. All right, so what does this look like if we want to go and say, what's going to happen over the next 2 to 3 years? Right? What is going to be the roadmaps, the paths for these different use cases in VR? Well, I think we're at VR 1.0, right? And this is the Samsung Gear VR platform. This has been the early adopters on Steam VR, really pushing immersion. There's going to be a bridge over the next year or so where we're going to get a lot more people involved in VR because of PlayStation VR and the amount of units that it's going to put on the market. The Daydream, right now, it's going to be a little bit limited initially because of Google's support for which phones it's on. But as that pushes out to more Android phones, that's also going to start to bring more immersion on mobile VR and more use cases because I think it will be more broadly developed for. We're also going to get the touch controls. And the thing that's exciting about that is Oculus has pumped $500 million into custom content and proprietary content that's really going to move the needle in terms of what we would think of as AAA console development for VR. Then we're going into 3.0, which is I think where we really start to see some growth, right? What this is Apple and Facebook, whenever Apple decides that it's time to enter the space, which will be when they don't need to worry about their stock price taking a dive because VR is here and they can be assured that that their hardware is going to be great and sell a lot of units. But then also on PC VR, there's a lot of great technical improvements that are coming over the next couple of years that will increase this immersion that I'm talking about. The idea of going untethered is big, right? That's huge. The idea of eye tracking is big, right? That lets you do more rapid acceleration without making people sick. And then Microsoft entering the space with AR and mixed reality applications and more accessible VR, I think is big as well. All right, so what does this look like in terms of revenue growth? Well, one thing that we all agree upon, including John Riccatello at Unity, is that it's likely to be exponential, right? And the thing about an exponential curve is that you don't really feel the growth until the growth really happened, right? You're kind of walking along on flat, and then it happens, and you look back, and you're like, wow, I'm really high. But at the point before it happens, you never even really see that you're right at the precipice, about to take a quick acceleration up. So if we take what I'm talking about and we turn that into an actual VR forecast, this is our numbers. I think we're at about 1.5 billion right now. Growth over the next year to about 3, 2 years to about 8. And we have those waves pushing that right now. We're in the phase of early adoption right now. That's kind of what we'd say is VR 1.0. 2.0 is going to be console VR. Microsoft will likely push into that as well, as it makes sense for helping them catch back up in the console race. But when it's really going to take off is mobile VR, right? That's the growth of the industry is all about scale and the platforms that have the opportunity to scale. And that really comes from mobile, right? And I think that Apple moving in whenever they do will really push that to the next level when we'll really start to see exponential growth. I think that the key for developers is to realize what the upside is right now on which platforms, right? So maybe I can make $1.5 million on the PC VR platforms, or I can get a first-party deal, which is sweet. Or there's a several $1 million opportunity PSVR over the next year until that install base really grows. But then being prepared to see when mobile VR takes off and thinking about what type of functional applications can really move the needle there. And that's likely to be social, right? And thinking about how to connect people with mobile VR applications. Okay, that is my talk, and it is time for questions. Thank you. Slides are available. I know I threw a lot of data out there. I already see a question. We'll go there first. We also do free EEDAR white papers. Check those out. Going to be doing one on VR with some of this data and more of that consumer data over the next month. So go there and go back there often. Doing a mobile one as well. And then there's an email for our EEDAR solutions. And we have several minutes for questions, I believe. Yes? I think I did hear the question, though. Am I including standalone VR? Talking about Snap-in VR on your phone? Absolutely, yeah. And if I go back to that slide, that's already, if you talk about like the number of units that are out there, that's already the biggest by far. In January, Google announced that they'd moved over 5 million cardboards alone, right? I know that retail deals there's several million units of Snap-in VR is going to move through Walmart this year at least. So when we say we're probably at somewhere between 5 and 10 million right now, I think after holiday this year, we'll be higher than that. I'm sure that we've all tried that, right? That is at a point on the scale where accessibility is as high as it can be. It's super easy. It is going to be an early way that some come into VR. Yeah, see, there we have. So at the that $20 price point, you're by far the most units that we're seeing. It's just without the ability to hook into the phone, the applications of what you can do are limited. And I don't see a breakout functional use case happening on that platform before it would happen on kind of a synced-in and mobile platform. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
So first, let me say just thank you for this presentation. It's extremely informative for those of us making VR games. So thank you a lot for that. Right. The question I had was just looking at your stats on the number of PCs with VR-capable GPUs.
Yeah.
You had about 5 million. Can you talk a little bit about where that data came from? I know that NVIDIA's claimed that they had, earlier this year it was 10 or 13 million, VR-capable GPUs. Where does that?
So that comes from conversations with other people in the VR hardware space that I would say are more of an expert on that than myself.
Okay.
And I will say that I think it is based on a VR compatible GPU being like a Radeon 970 or above, or an AMD, the one below the 1060. So
you mean the Radeon 280 and the
yes.
AMD or the NVIDIA 970?
Correct. NVIDIA 970 and the 280. Correct. Right.
Does that take into account the recent announcement that the Rift made about supporting the 960, which is a lower level?
I think what we're seeing too is the movement down, where because they're getting the technology better to support lower, that I will say that this is a conservative number, and okay. I would agree that now I will say that I don't think it's much higher than maybe 10 million at most.
Okay.
But I will say that it could be closer to 10 million.
Okay, thank you.
About geographies. First of all, great information here. Thank you. With the smartphones and internet penetration growing at massive levels in emerging markets, I haven't. First, the big question is how about emerging markets with this mobile VR penetration and adoption, and if it's at some point correlated with the type of content right. that is going to be offered there.
Right. So the question is, what about regions, and what about global regions, and what's the opportunity there? And this actually gets back to talking about kind of the mobile VR, because there's something that I didn't think to mention, which is, so first of all, we do have good region data for these Steam VR games in the HTC Vive, and it is overwhelmingly Western markets. It's about 50% United States, then a big chunk, maybe 35% Europe, and then the whole rest of the world is coming up with the rest of that, and almost none of it is in emerging markets, right? So when we look at the high end, as you would expect, because these are expensive systems, they're almost all Western developed markets. Now, I think that there is a huge opportunity for growth of getting people involved in VR and moving low-end VR headsets, moving $20 VR headsets. The problem is that there's not a lot of money to be made in software right now. There's not a lot of money to be made in premium software on mobile anyway, right? It's free to play. And then it's just very difficult to make these experiences on a model that will move revenue on for a snap-in mobile headset. So what I would say is, and when we look at that pie of that $1.5 billion, not a lot of it is mobile app revenue, right? Most of it is moved by those premium headsets. So if you're going to make a low-end VR headset that can snap in a smartphone, I think there's a huge opportunity in emerging markets. I also think that's a very competitive space, working with some clients in that space with razor-thin margins where you need really good connections with big retailers. But I think that as these better mobile solutions become kind of more broadly available, as has happened in mobile, the growth areas years from now will be as those emerging markets catch up.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Oh.
There's only 12 more minutes to the next session, so to take your questions outside.
Okay, awesome. All right, guys, no more chance for questions, but thank you so much. If you had one, catch me outside.